You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony.
Welcome back. You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony. And we have with us in the studio Mike Vra, who is the managing attorney and director of Homeline, Inc. We're talking about the new book they've come out with called How to Be the Smartest Renter on Your Block. And we have a caller, Jeff on line one. Good morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Gene. I'll apologize and say I just tuned in, so if this was covered or is off topic, I'm sorry. But there's many times I manage a 60-unit property, and there's many times people show up just based on my yard signs looking to rent an apartment, and I have someone that's vacating. So I have zero notice. Is it inappropriate at all times to try to show my apartment where the people are vacating to someone that just shows up on the property? Because that's a lot of times where you make the sale, is when people are just showing up. So I hate to turn those people away. Just wondering what you think about that.
Okay. Yeah, if I could try to field
question.
that one, Jeff. Let me tell you what I would do if I'm in your shoes, the sales pitch I would try. Because the law, I don't think lets you do this. I don't think it lets you go in with zero notice. Like I said earlier, you can knock on the door or maybe try the cell phone. But here's what I would say to that tenant who wants to see the place. First of all, if you have an empty unit, you show them that, right? The model, if that's available. Sure. 16 units, that's unlikely, but it's possible. But the other thing you could try is you could say, hey, look, I want to show you this place, and I think that it sounds like it fits what you're looking for, but there's somebody that lives there right now, and I don't want to let you in with zero notice to these people. And if you move in here, and you're here for 2 years and you're moving out, I'm going to treat you the same. I'm going to give you the same respect. I'm going to make sure that I don't just walk in on you. Sure. So I want to give these people some notice. But I don't think the law lets you go in. I don't see how that can possibly be construed as an emergency, which is what the statute requires.
Thank you.
Sure.
You know, I disagree a little bit. If the person's not home, if it's during the day, which is often when we're showing these, we seem to be confusing notice with permission.
Oh, no,
from the renter.
You don't need the permission from the
renter. So
renter.
if I can give them notice and say, I've got someone here right now, I'm going to enter your unit to show it, and they're not home, I would consider that adequate notice.
Yeah, you might say it's adequate, but the law requires reasonable, which is a different issue.
But I suppose that kind of goes back to maybe the issue that you've been hearing, Mike, where someone says, I was sleeping and someone just came in.
That's right.
Because they work third shift.
Yep.
No one's listening. Someone's assuming a regular work day.
Well, okay, and they're not answering their phone because they're sleeping.
And let me just, because we've talked about privacy a lot, this is something I bring up in the book, and I bring up on the phone with people a lot. Landlords will never say this, and you guys said that I was going to vilify landlords. I don't think I am, but this is a real practical sense I've gotten over time of dealing with landlords and security deposits being tied into the privacy issue.
Oh.
I don't know if you got to that chapter or not, but I believe, you guys might not concede this point, but I believe the single biggest factor a tenant has when trying to get back a security deposit isn't how clean they leave the apartment, although that matters, isn't whether they give proper notice, but it's if the landlord re-rents the place for the day after they leave.
I did read that. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you were advising landlords tenants, renters, to cooperate as much as they possibly can to get the place re-rented, because the landlord was less likely to be super picky about security deposit issues if he had a new renter coming in right away.
There's something in it for the tenant. That's right.
I thought that was really interesting.
Well, and sometimes I have seen that tied to that when sometimes with some single-family homes that we've rented out for someone because they couldn't sell for a period of time, it is key that it's always looking nice. And so in the rental agreement, and I think you mentioned that, if you need to show something, and when you have something that's still for sale, even though it's being rented, you've got some issues because you've got someone who wants to see it now in the next hour or two.
Right.
And you need to have someone who complies. That's always where the rub is. And that's a real difficult thing. But that, I think, can be worked out as long as you take the time to spell that out between what's expected between the renter and
the landlord.
And the landlord in that case.
Sure.
And in the case of a home being rented, I know there were times when we gave the renter an incentive, a little bit extra, not just their security back, but maybe 1.5 times their security back or double their security back if they complied with that kind of notice, and then leaving after the sale took place.
Well, I'll give you the ideal, which is what my last landlord. I've been a homeowner for 10 years now, but my last landlord gave us an open house date. And basically, he held an open house on a Saturday or a Sunday, and he said that people are going to be over for 3 hours. I can't make you leave, right? But I would like you to be there. My wife said, here's the deal. You want a new stereo, and our deposit was $900, something like that. And however much we get back for the deposit, you can use for your stereo. And I guarantee you that place looked amazing for the open house.
That's great. I used to answer the hotline for the Multi-Housing Association back in the 80s, and Gene, you did too, because we had to do it to get our certification as resident managers. And I don't know if there was a tenants union back then or legal aid hotline, but the Multi-Housing Association had a hotline that renters would call. And no kidding, we would sit at our desk for 4 hours, like one Thursday out of the month, I think, and the phone never stopped ringing that entire 4 hours. Often, the first thing we told someone was, have you discussed this issue with your landlord?
Sure.
And many times they had not, or the landlord had not discussed it with the tenant. So I think the privacy issues, the showings, after you've given notice, it's about the landlord and tenant coming to some kind of livable agreement, and they need to talk to each other to cooperate.
That always helps.
Now, let's talk about this thing with the privacy issue. In the book, it also talks about that for violating this, there could be some repercussions for a landlord, too.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. The law that was passed in 95 is a very light penalty against the landlord, that law itself. It's $100 per violation. So then the tenant would need to prove that a violation occurs. The other, I think, problem with that statute is the tenant can only file the case while they're a tenant. They can't wait and sue in small claims court after they've left. No landlord ever likes to get sued, so there's going to be obvious friction, but it has to be while the tenant is still a resident to file under that statute.
Okay.
So if it's at the end of a tenancy,
you can't do anything about it under that statute. If it's really egregious, we've had a couple cases in the news where, in both instances, landlords have actually set up cameras in showers. You can't make stories like that up. But those are not limited to $100. It gets into it's called an intrusion upon seclusion.
Then we get into something else.
It's an actual tort.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. But you, in the book, I think you give some very good advice to someone. You say, realistically, court's not going to be an option. Tell our listeners, what is it you encourage someone to do, a renter to do or say, if they believe that their privacy is being violated?
Well, the first thing I do is I let the landlord know the law. We actually have form letters, which is our most looked at thing on our website, is these form letters that tenants can download, and it cites the statute. I don't always assume that landlords know what the statute says on this issue. And so I want to let them know, hey, here's a rule, follow it. I mean, some people drive the speed limit. So you hope that some landlords will follow the rule. Believe it or not, I try. I'm not a saint, but on the speed limit, I really try.
You mentioned this in your book, unauthorized persons. That's a legitimate business person or business reason for a landlord to enter an apartment, is if they suspect unauthorized persons are living there. And this actually comes up for us quite a bit. Someone signed the lease, moved in, and then before we know it, there's somebody else we see coming in and out, or someone else's car is parked in the parking lot. And it's a concern for landlords because we do background screening and criminal background screening on residents. We want to know that the people who live there are within our criteria.
Sure.
Because we assure all our renters that they're going to be within our criteria. So to me, it makes no sense to give someone a heads up that we're coming in if we're concerned about an issue like this. Because if we give them a day's notice, then the unauthorized person is gone when we come in. Or, I mean, we look for things like, are there clothes, too many clothes, or are there male clothes in the apartment when there's no male on the lease? Are there 5 toothbrushes when there's only supposed to be 2 people living here? That kind of thing. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll be honest with you. One of the most common pieces of advice I give now, with technology being cheaper and cheaper all the time, is if you think your landlord's coming in when you're not home, set up surveillance. And that is one of the ones that's a winner for a tenant. Hey, they're going through my underwear drawer. And I don't know what the reason was for, but if you have a 10-second video of you looking for men's underwear.
No. Did I imply that? I didn't mean to imply that. Yeah. I'm talking about an open closet. I'm talking about pairs of shoes by the front door. Yeah. But you know what? It's against the law to have unauthorized people living in an apartment.
Well, it's not a crime.
Okay, it is if the renter on the
trespassing.
lease is a Section 8 voucher holder and she has an unauthorized adult living with her. That's fraud.
Well, in Section 8 world, most of rental housing is not Section 8.
Okay, but we do a lot of it.
Okay.
You
I mean,
know,
you're
I've
right.
worked with a lot.
That could be a violation. You're right. That could be a criminal violation.
I would say that's when the violation becomes really critical, is
Sure.
when there's a Section 8 voucher involved. So that's where we're more sensitive to it, actually.
Okay.
Is when we've got those kinds of issues going on, too.
I can hear what you're saying. I mean, the law could have made an exception. You know, you can go in with no notice if you suspect that an unauthorized occupant is living there, but it doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that
it says it's a legitimate purpose,
Right.
but it doesn't say it's exempt from the adequate or reasonable notice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do you think there's anything else that should be written, Tony, on that?
It would be a huge exception if you made it that, because that's what every landlord would use.
I know, but it's also a huge problem in accepting in having unauthorized people living there. Because if, let's say, something goes wrong with the household, they stop paying rent. If we know there's an unauthorized person living there, we actually have to file eviction against that person as well as the person on the lease. That's legally required. We may have come across their name and mail. Also, we have to send them a CRP every January, even though they're not authorized. And they're violating, if they're on a Section 8 voucher, that's fraud. And we cannot be party to that. We can't accept the fact that they live there without also being accused of fraud.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think that's an important issue that should be addressed.
You're right. There are issues, especially when it comes to eviction, because if you don't have all of the people named, I mean, how many times?
You might end up with a squatter, and it's actually happened to me, where roommates said, we need to move out. We're getting another roommate. We turn it over to him? Sure. He never does the paperwork. Before I know it, he's living there, not paying rent. I don't even know who he is.
Well, John Doe is the most evicted guy in the state because most landlords list him in the eviction.
How many places has he rented around the state?
I don't know, but man, he gets around.
Yes, he has. Well, we're coming up to the top of the hour. We're going to have to take another break here for commercial, a little bit of news, but we've got Mike with us in the studio in the second hour too. So if you've got questions, we want to hear from you. The number to call, 651-289-4488, when we pick his brain on more on how to be the smartest renter on your block. We'll be back after these messages.